Thank you, Susan. Sometimes I have props. Sometimes I have costumes. This is my costume today. I'm a guy who wants to go out and garden. It was a few minutes ago, but I want you to remember what Mark was just thinking. Thank you so much, Mark and Ray. I am so inspired every month by the music that they choose. So you might think that I decide what we're doing and that we use a certain word or whatever, but what they do usually sparks something in me to make me think about things. I really read the lyrics to the words that they have put together as if they were like doing a divination, a card reading, and the cards that show up tell me what it is that I'm supposed to say. And so I'll get rid of this prop in a second by saying, "Come with me and you'll be in a world of pure imagination." Some of you know that as a song from Willy Wonka and from the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, if you read books. And Roald Dahl, who wrote the books, was known for his imagination and the imaginary worlds that he created. And so we think of imagination as, like what Susan was suggesting just a few minutes ago, was this idea that when we are a child, that we are full of imagination, that we have imaginary friends, that we do things that our parents look at us and go, well, isn't he imaginative, or isn't he creative? Or, and sometimes it's like, isn't that cute? He lives outside of reality. Okay, so that was pretty much me. And we don't really know what imagination means in the sense of the 12 powers of what Charles Fillmore was talking about. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with what I'm saying right now, if we were able to pan the camera over there, and hopefully we can get a slide or something of it, there are 12 words and 12 months and 12 apostles and 12 parts of the body and 12 ideas and concepts that we're working with this year, and that everybody who preaches here are talking about these words. Now, as a person who loves words and who loves the history of words and the what I think of as the paleontology or the genealogy of words and the archaeology of words, I love this idea. I'm really excited about being able to come and talk about words. But this word is different, right? This word is imaginary. Imagination, unlike strength and faith and power and order and zeal and release and life, all of those words are found in the Bible. They are Christian concepts found in the Bible. But you don't find the word imagination in the Bible unless you really, really dig. And so we're going to dig today. And we're also going to talk about why that particular word, I'm going to put my magic hat over there and maybe something will appear. There is a difference between this word and all those other words. I'm reminded of Sesame Street. I don't know if any of you remember Sesame Street. That's back in the days when we got a fourth channel on the television, and it was called PBS. And and they used to sing a song every week. One of these things is not like the other. And you had to figure out which of those things were not like all of the other things. And that was to prompt our ideas of creativity and imagination to understand the difference between things. And secretly, they were also teaching us about diversity and about community and about racism and all kinds of other things that they weren't really supposed to talk about at the time. But I'm really influenced by those ideas that I think of or thought of as imagination. But the more I would dig into this word, this idea of imagination, and I'm not using that accidentally, idea and imagination, because they're very similar and they have the same genealogy, they have the same roots. Imagination stands out because it's different. And it's different because of the period of time that it was formed in the imagination of the person who gave us these words to ponder for a whole year. And so Charles and Mildred Fillmore, who brought together the people and the ideas and the things that became the Unity Church, were part of a larger movement at the time. And so we've talked about this before, but in the 1800s, late 1800s, there was a thing here that was called the World Exposition, the Columbia Exposition of the World. 1893 was the World's Fair, but it was celebrating 400 years of slavery and colonialism. And no, that's not what they said it was about. But they were talking about the idea that the world of exploration that found the new world. Okay, it was old world to the people who already lived here for thousands of years, but that they were celebrating this idea of all of this new thought and all of this new technology and all of this new democracy that came from this new world, and they were celebrating this. And people came from all over the world to see the wonders of our future, to imagine what a new world could look like, and to reimagine metaphorically what this new age of exploration would bring to us. And in that world, Charles and Mildred Fillmore were there. And why were they there? Because they were part of a wider movement that we at that time called the Congregational movement. And nowadays, we think of Congregationalism as a particular religion or sect of Christianity, but at that time it didn't mean that. It meant that us, okay, so here's a congregation. I'm looking at all of you, and if you're out there in virtual land, you're part of this congregation too. That we got to decide what it was that we did. We got to decide what it was that we believed. We got to imagine what it was like to be a part of this part of God. And that was a revolutionary thought. And where did that thought come from? Well, it came from the 1600s when people came over to the New World to escape religious persecution and to be able to worship in the way that they felt. And so that came out of a reaction to Protestantism, to Catholicism, to all kinds of isms, where the idea of God was translated to us by a vicar or by a bishop or by an archbishop or by a pope that told us what to do. And each congregation, each place that people congregated, they were ruled by rules, a book, and a person that vicariously spoke to you from God. And in that time, for a period of about the time that Columbus landed to the period of the exposition of 1893, 400 years, 401 years actually, the idea of imagination changed. Why? Because it did not exist in any way, shape, or form that we understand. So nowadays, when I say imagination, we think of that as a childlike gift that we outgrow because eventually we have to live in reality. Imagination and reality have become opposites. What does that mean? So I said that imagination doesn't exist in the Bible, but it really does. It exists in one place. It exists in the book of Matthew. And in the book of Matthew, Jesus is born. He tells a story that Jesus is born. And from the east, the book was written in Greek, by the way, so the word is the Magi. The Magi. The Magi. The Magi come from the east. And who are the Magi? Well, they are mages. What is a mage? A mage is what was called a magician back then. So nowadays we think of a magician as an illusionist, a trickster, somebody who fakes us, somebody who imitates realities that don't exist. But a magi was a prophet. And these prophets came from the east because they were the prophets of Zoroaster. And Zoroaster was the Persian idea, a Persian religion. And they were a religion that was, if you think of the world at the time, that the world of the Abrahamic faiths, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, they were all what we call Mithraists. They believed in the mythologies that were handed to them from the Mithra. And so ideas like a Messiah and Christmas and the four seasons and astrology and all kinds of things came into those religions because of the former religions before that. But religions that were in Persia and India believed other things. And one of the things they believed is this idea of divination. And so Zoroastrianism followed the prophet Zoroaster. And Zoroaster was like, if you watch The Princess Bride, the dread pirate Robert, when he retired, gave his name off to somebody else. Well, Zoroaster was a prophet that there were many, many Zoroasters. And so there was like, the dread pirate Zoroaster, the first, the second, the third. So by the time that Jesus was born, they were like on the seventh Zoroaster. And they brought gifts because they were prophets, because they were seers, because they were full of imagination. So imagination means to live in a world of the Magi. to see a world nobody else, nation actually means world. So before it became flat lines on a map, the word nation comes from the idea that you live in a certain world. And the world of imagination is the world that is unseen. And certain of us have gifts to be able to see those things. And those people who had those gifts would prophesy who the next gifted people were coming. And the three magi, who, because we are so power focused, we have retranslated to say they were the three kings. But they were not kings. There were not kings in that sense. They were three prophets who had divined that if they could follow a star, they would find a child who would bring the next age on. And they brought the gifts of birth and death and the symbols of anointing of not a new king, but a new divine messenger, a new prophet, a new seer, a new magical person. And that's what imagination meant at that time. We don't see the word imagination in the English language until about the 1400s. And what it means at the time is the ability to see in oneself the things that are unseen. At the same time, we are also learning that the things that are inside of ourselves is not real. It's not valid. When I do readings, and so I do what's called the Mexican or Schulten Tarot, and I also do the African version that comes from my priesthood. We, in our Western sense, call that divination. So we have a sense that the divine, whatever that is to you, speaks to us or shows us visions, and then we're the special ones that put it out to you, right? So that's why I get to be on the altar, and I get to divine things, and I'm like channeling God right now, right? So you all will follow me, and that's the sense that we have. But that's a purely Western Abrahamic Christian. When I say Abrahamic, I mean the three religions that come from Abraham: monotheistic, linear, and patriarchal ideas. Imagination is not one of those. Imagination is not patriarchal. Imagination is not divine. Imagination is the world that exists inside of us. And from it comes things that don't exist. And that's a radical thought in 1893. And how does it enter into the United States? Well, in 1893, at the exposition in Columbia, there was also the World Congress of Religions. And all the great Buddhists are there, and all the great Hindu philosophers are there, and all the great Christian American philosophers are there. And so the birth of religions that we now know happened in those places. And the confluence of all of that thought gave rise to the Christian Science movement, to the Unitarian movement, to the Universalist movement, to the Congregational movement, and to the Unity movement. And they were all influenced by the radical idea being brought from the East These magi from the east, like Yogananda, were coming to the United States and talking about the radical idea that we are all a part of God and not separate from God. And so Charles Fillmore, who was with all of those American philosophers and American founders of these American religions, were all influenced by what became the transcendental movement. And that was using the ideas of the East, of the magicians and the magi and the magoi, if you're Greek, all from the East, telling us that we have something inside of us, that we are not separate from the God, whatever God they believed in, that we were a part of that. And that was a radical, radical thought. But it's really not. I mean, if you go on in Matthew, you find that Jesus, at the end of his short life, with only 30-some years, is actually saying, all of these things that I can do, because, the Magi prophesied how special I am, all of these things that I can do, you can do too. And so when we talk about the gifts of the Spirit, when we talk about Pentecost, and when we talk about upon the death of Jesus, everybody's like, goes to dinner one day, and all of a sudden it's like, I can heal, and I can see, and I can do all of these things. It is because they developed the gifts of imagination. Imagination at that time literally meant those things that we cannot perceive or do with the known senses. As humans at the time, and all the way up into the 1800s, Westerners believed that there was a physical, material, corporeal world that was reality. And only certain blessed, special ones of us could actually perceive and see outside of that. But is that true? Transcendentalism, which influenced Charles Fillmore more than any other movement, believed in the idea that intuition was more important than logic, that illumination, the ability to see things, to shed light on things, to literally see, was more important than logic and reality. And so today, we don't understand those words in the same way he understood it, or even in the same way that it was meant when those ideas first came to us from the East in Jesus' time, and then again in the 1800s. Why? Because at the same time in 1893, at that same period in the late 1800s, there was another movement going on. And so, for those of you who are into philosophy, that was also the time when Nietzsche, and remember him? I don't mean like, are you old enough to remember him? I mean like the things that he believed in, what he said. And he said something really, really, really radical at that same time. Because he came from those same traditions that all of these other American and European religions came from, that from the same period of time, from the 1400s, through the Enlightenment, through the 16 and 1700s, through the age of Enlightenment and the age of science and everything, came this age of philosophy. And in the late 1800s, he proclaimed, God is dood. Anybody know what that means? God is dead. Now, he didn't mean that literally, but because as Americans especially, we are so literal, that we didn't really understand what he was saying because we didn't really bother to read his books. I'm reminded of that because literally 100 years later, John Lennon, who wrote, "Imagine all the people, imagine there's no heaven," also said, "We are more popular than God." People didn't bother to know what Lennon was saying. They also didn't bother to read the book that Nietzsche was saying. And what he was saying was that for 400 years, through the Enlightenment and through the age of science and through the Industrial Revolution, that we no longer have the ability to believe in God as an old, white, wise man above us who can tell us what to do. And all of the old ways that religion has brought us to and has brought us down to no longer exists. And many people went in that direction and believed what he was saying. Many simply just moved to a level of agnosticism and atheism based on the ideas of not just Nietzsche, but all of the philosophers that were at their height at that time. But at the same time, here in America, all kinds of new things were being born. And one of them is the birth of imagination in a whole new way that was really a whole old way. You see, when Nietzsche was writing about this, he was writing about an idea that had disappeared for hundreds and hundreds or 1,000 years. And so one of his books was called Thus Spake Zarathustra. And so some of you might know that song and that title as the theme from Space Odyssey 2001, you know. And so I'll hum a few bars. You don't want me to sing the whole thing. I don't know the words. It goes, Ray knows it. Da, 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 da. This is like, Thus Spake Zarathustra. Zarathustra is a German rendition of Zoroaster. And he was talking about the idea of Zoroastrianism. He wasn't saying God is dead. He was saying that the need to go through the Pope and the need to believe what religion tells us is dead. And that the anthropomorphic God is dead. Because from the age of enlightenment, we realized, like Descartes told us, I think, therefore I am. And because I am a part of I am. Because when Descartes was saying I am, he meant I am a God. And that was a radical, totally not acceptable idea of the Enlightenment that separated those men from religion. And the men who practiced that form of religion had to escape in order to have those thoughts. What are those thoughts? Well, the men of the Enlightenment that came about in the 16 and 1700s landed on our shores. And instead of the United States being formed as a conglomeration of nations that were based upon Christianity, they were actually based upon ideas of men of enlightenment that said that we are each individuals that have autonomy and power, that we do not believe in the divine right of kings, that we believe that we each have our own thoughts, our own ideas, our own intuition. So while imagination does not exist in the Bible, the Greek word idea does. An idea and imagination are really the same thing. It means I see something. I shed light on a thing. I have that thing revealed to me. As recovering Christians, we think apocalypse means doomsday. We think Revelation is the end of the world. But the Greeks and the writers of the Bible used that word to say, this is the age of enlightenment. Apocalypse literally means to shine a light on a thing. And this, they believed in the 1800s, was that age. That after several hundred years after the Enlightenment, that we were finally beginning to see. And as we were beginning to see, as we were all beginning to understand that we each were like Jesus and were being born, that the wise men from the East were coming to people like Eddie and to the Fillmores and to thinkers and philosophers of the American ideas, and bringing the idea of illumination, of magic, of Eastern philosophies, of things that transcend the former ideas of reality to who we are today. And so he includes the word imagination in the most pure sense. If you think of yourself as a mage, as a magician, each of us has the ability to see. And at the time, they did not foretell the future. They foretold the signs, the omens, the augurs that said something was happening, something was changing. But in Zoroastrianism, the idea of change is mysterious and mystery. You see, we don't know the future. Not that it can't be seen, but we wouldn't recognize it if it were in front of our face. It is said that when Cortez came to the New World and parked his boats off the coast of South America, that the mage and the sorcerers and the shaman of the people who saw him as the next Quetzalcoatl, as the next coming of the next great prophet of the next great age, they had prophesied that he would be on the coast at a particular day and time, and they all gathered there and saw nothing. And his boats were out there all the time. But because in their mind they did not have a metaphor for boat, they did not have a metaphor for the idea that humans could actually be out there in the middle of the ocean, they didn't see him. And by the time he came there and conquered them and brought smallpox and slavery and decimation and change to the people, they saw the omens and the augurs and the portents, but they didn't know what it would be and what it would look like. They could never have imagined how horrible their future would be. They just knew it was coming. What does this mean to us? We just got out of a period of time, about a year and a half now, where our world has changed drastically. The way we go to church has changed drastically. The way we talk to our friends has changed drastically. The way we cluster ourselves and meet and socially distance ourselves. And now we're coming out of this age of, we're probably going to call it the age of Corona or something. And as we come out of this age, we have the ability to do one of two things. One of those things are known. How many times have you said, or you heard somebody say, I want to get back to normal? Is there a normal? Can you ever believe that things will ever be the same again? That you will ever count on the idea that your favorite festivals, that your favorite gatherings, that your favorite anything are surely going to happen year after year after year after year? Our idea of reality has been interrupted, and there is no normal. And is there a going back? Or can we imagine, because we have the power, there is no government, there is no pope, there is no anybody that is going to tell us as a congregation, as a world, as a group, as a philosophy, as a political party, as anything. After what we just experienced, all bets are off. And it's not the end of the world. It's the beginning. And so I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to come with me and live in a world of imagination. Not my imagination, not Willy Wonka's or Roald Dahl's. If I were the magician, if I were the magi, if I were the seer, if I were the prophet, if I were the soothsayer and could say the things that soothe you, I might imagine, like we've talked about today and like we've sung about and like we saw John Denver, all of the things that we imagine are the things that we desire. We imagine peace. We imagine unity. We imagine all of the powers and the gifts of the words that we use and that we talk about. But what does it mean to you? Aside from me telling you what you are, what you want, what your future is, what is your magic? What is your world? What is your imagination? And as you go through this month and you get several different takes from several of us, what imagination is, those are just triggers. They're just the best metaphors that we have in this moment. But I want you to consider the idea, the imagined idea, the creative idea that your world is not the same as my world, that your future is not the same as my future, that your purpose is not the same as my purpose, that your destiny is not the same as my destiny, and that living in my reality and finding a way to match and to dance with your reality, with your future, with your magic, with your seeing, with your ability to divine your future, and understanding the mystery of who you are as a piece of the universe, as a part of Source, as a literal, tiny, but significant, real piece of what God or Source or power or love or mystery is to you. And I want to thank you for being my imaginary friends. And when I say imaginary, I mean real. And you can open your eyes whenever you want. Thank you, Susan. Namaste.